guys, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Ken, and today we're here to talk about Dahmer. Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer Story.
It's quite the title there.
It's quite the title. This is the newest series on Netflix, although it's not quite all that new anymore. I feel like we were a couple months late to the party on this one, but
dang, has it been out that long?
It's been out at least a month and a half, maybe 2 months by this point. But before we get into talking about it, we're going to do a full series breakdown, all 10 episodes. We're going to discuss this as a whole.
Yeah.
We may delve a little bit into some spoiler territory, so if you guys haven't seen this, definitely make sure that you watch it before you watch this review. But hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, like this video and comment down below, guys. What's your thoughts on Dahmer? If you've checked it out, let us know. Yeah. And then turn on those bell notifications for all of our future videos. But yeah, let's where do you want to start with this? It's 10 episodes.
Yeah, so
10 episodes.
I was really eager to watch this. I love like documentaries, like murder.
Michelle loves murder.
Murder mystery. Murder mystery stuff. I don't know, that's always been my jam. I feel like don't typically gravitate towards those things.
I love fictional murder. I love horror movies, obviously. Right. But when it starts to get a little too real, like this show does, like I grew up like knowing who Jeffrey Dahmer was. I remember being a kid and hearing about him. I was like scared to death.
Right.
And I think that's when he was locked up, is when the news came out and you started hearing about Jeffrey Dahmer. But
yeah, I was extremely eager to watch this. I kept asking you, we got to watch this. We got to watch this. So I'm going to blame you for being late on this, but
you can blame me. But yeah, you can blame me. But we watched this over the span of like 6 days. We finished it last night.
We did.
So it's been a little bit longer than a week since we watched it. But yeah, all 10 episodes in a week. I think we did pretty good.
I feel like it took us longer than a week.
It's about a week. We started at mid last week, so it was about a week and a half.
But also, not only does like that kind of stuff interest me, I would consider myself a fairly big fan of Evan Peters. I feel like he is a very I guess you would say underrated actor.
Oh yeah, he's a great actor.
Yeah, he's very good. He does tend to do the same kind of roles. I mean, if you
he's also Quicksilver in the Marvel universe,
true.
And that's kind of a silly, kind of more comedic performance that he pulls off very well.
I feel like we first got introduced to him with American Horror Story, right?
It was American Horror Story. I think that was
season 1, right?
Season 1. Yeah. He was in something else. I can't remember what he was in. Yeah. I think he was in the movie Kick-Ass, actually.
Yeah, I think I heard that.
Yeah, I think he was in Kick-Ass, and I also think he was in some stuff when he was a kid too.
Yeah, probably.
I just can't think of off the top of my head.
Wouldn't have American Horror Story, the first season, have been out before Kick-Ass?
I think Kick-Ass came out like maybe a year or two before American Horror Story.
All right, well, there you go.
But I wouldn't have known who he was.
Gotcha.
Yes, we were first introduced to him as a performer probably in American Horror Story.
Yeah. So, I was just super excited to watch this for sure.
Yeah. So this is, from creator Ryan Murphy, who, of course, has done all the American Horror Stories.
Right.
He also did Nip Tuck back in the day. We used to be a fan of that show.
Yeah, we did.
So basically every, super effed up show that you've ever watched on TV was Ryan Murphy probably had something to do with it. I'm kind of lukewarm on Ryan Murphy just as a creator, because I feel like every single time we get excited to watch a new season of American Horror Story because the premise always looks really cool.
Yeah.
And we get like 3 episodes in, we're just like, this is going nowhere. This is not for us. And then we always quit. So I was a little apprehensive when I knew his name was attached to it. And I will say, I do have a few problems with this show, but I was pretty engaged the whole time. I never felt like we needed to jump off or anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too, though, because, this is a real life story. Like it's not a made up story. So it's not like he came up with all this himself. Yeah. And
I mean, there's some parts of this show that you're like, did that really happen that way? And I know you looked up some of that stuff, and it was true. So I'm guessing that he was pretty accurate with most of the stuff. Obviously, you can't get all the little behind closed doors interactions and
Right.
stuff. There's probably some liberties taken there. But you do have Evan Peters playing Jeffrey Dahmer. You have Richard Jenkins playing his father
Yeah.
in this movie, Lionel Dahmer.
Yeah,
You have,
which I'm just going to say that he was definitely a standout for me.
oh yeah, I mean Richard Jenkins is usually great in everything he's in.
Yeah.
You know, even silly comedies like Step Brothers, he's awesome in them. Niecy Nash, I would say, is probably the third lead in this movie. She plays the neighbor
yeah,
of Jeffrey
for sure.
Dahmer. Glenda Cleveland. You have Molly Ringwald in this show as well,
Yeah.
as the stepmom, and you have Penelope Ann Miller, who I know of from Kindergarten Cop.
Well,
Who
it's funny
plays his
though
mom.
because you didn't catch that, and
I always get confused with that actress because she looks so much like Naomi Watts. So even when I see an older version of her, I'm like, is that Naomi Watts? They're just very similar the way they look.
yeah, I thought she looked familiar, and so I looked it up, and sure enough, I'm like, oh, she's the love interest or she's the teacher, I guess, from Kindergarten Cop. So
Yeah. And the story here is we're basically, it's told in a non-linear fashion. So you're jumping around through all different time periods of Jeffrey Dahmer's life. But you're basically following Jeffrey Dahmer and his encounters with multiple victims throughout the course of his life, starting from the beginning, where I think we jump in like when he's like 6 years old, going all the way to his death, his inevitable death. So
yeah,
I don't know, like where do you want to start here?
so just talking about the time jumps or the timeline and stuff, it seems like it's getting more and more common or popular, I guess, to do the, back and forth of the timeline and stuff. And not even just like, current time with flashback. Like it literally just goes like to all different kinds of, I don't know, don't know the word I'm looking for
It's
here.
like,
It's not like a traditional like flashback type of setup. It's like, 1 minute he's 6 and then 1 minute he's 21 and then 1 minute he's 18. And it's just very messy a little bit. And so that was one of my issues with the movie or show. I'm sorry. It just got a little confusing sometimes. To remind yourself what has happened and what hasn't happened yet and stuff like that.
That's my problem with that kind of setup because it's easy to distinguish between, okay, he's 6 and now he's 30.
Right.
Or even now he's 6,
stuff.
now he's 20, now he's 30. I can do that. But when they're doing like 1977 and then they're going to 1981 and then back to 1979, it's like that time period is so close. And he looks pretty much the same in all those different time periods. So you're like, what's going on? Okay, so now he's living with his grandma. Now he's in an apartment. Now he's back living with his dad. It's like, we're like, it's hard to gain like any bearings.
I found myself, like I said, forgetting what had happened. Has he already killed someone or has he still not killed anyone yet? Yeah. So that part would get would kind of make it a little confusing for me, but.
Yeah, and I mean, he lived in a lot of different places. He lived in a lot of places, a lot of different spots for his victims. And then he ultimately ends up in the apartments in a very like urban area, I believe in Milwaukee is where they end up is Milwaukee. I don't ever think that they come out and say it in the actual show, but they definitely allude to it that he chose that area specifically to target, people of color, and because most of his victims were black or definitely Asian.
Yeah, people were like when he was getting interrogated once they had taken him into custody, the police did definitely bring that up, but he didn't seem like it was an intentional thing.
Yeah.
But
I mean, he wasn't like well-to-do or anything, so it's not like he could move to any other area.
Right.
I feel like
this. Like you said, this took us through not just, like what he had done, like to his victims and stuff, like the killing, the murderings. But it also just took us through different, parts of his life that you would it just kind of gave this behind the scene look at what he might have gone through, I guess, to possibly make him the way that he was.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting thing that this show did was it talked about how, we naturally just want a reason for things.
Yeah.
we want an explanation, and we can't stand it when there's not one. And so this kind of goes into, why was he the way that he was? And I mean, I don't think that this would spoil it because this is like real life. It was a real life serial killer, but you basically like you don't know why he was the way that he was, and so
I mean, some people are just wired that way. Like it's a natural thing that they're wired to be
right, and
evil and
that's almost
monsters.
That's
sometimes
even
you can't explain the monster,
right, and I think that's scary for people, to not have a reason for something because it seems too unpredictable or.
Yeah, they definitely do attempt to explain. His father and him are cutting open roadkill and stuff, and like the very beginning of the show, and his mom's an alcoholic and a drug addict, and
like he definitely came from a mother with mental illness, and so that's always I feel like that's kind of at the front of your mind. You're like, okay, well, if his mom had a mental illness, it would make sense that he could have had a mental illness as well.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, this show, it does a lot of stuff. It's telling the story, but it also just kind of makes you think, just about like, I was mentioning how, Richard Jenkins was a standout to me. Like I personally got super emotional in some of the scenes that he was in with, Evan Peters, just as his dad. He took a lot of blame on himself. And so just those scenes where he was trying to basically say, son, it was me. It's my fault. I'm the reason that you're like this. And so it was just really like, even though Jeffrey Dahmer was in fact a monster and did some horrible things and there's no reason for it, I couldn't help but still have sympathy and like feel very heartbroken for this family because.
And I think that's why I haven't dug like into it too deep, but isn't there a lot of like backlash on this show? Like people being kind of angry because they do portray him a little empathetic, a little sympathetic. But I don't really think that they were trying to do that, but it is. You get such good actors like Evan Peters and Richard Jenkins, like you just can't help but feel that way.
You're saying
scenes.
That they don't want you to feel like any sort of sympathy?
I don't feel like they necessarily want you to, but at the same time, if these scenes really happen that way, then you're going to show them. And because you got such great world-class actors to do these scenes, you're going to feel a little empathy for them.
Yeah, and obviously, we're parents, and so it kind of reminds me of the show that we watched, Defending Jacob, on Apple TV Plus, Apple Plus TV,
Apple TV Plus.
Just throwing yourself into a situation where you're like, what would I do if this was my kid? Like, I just can't even imagine where you would be mentally. And so it was just very
it's tough because there's always going to be a side of you, no matter what, that wants to defend your kid,
right? So that was definitely a big standout, just watching those father-son scenes and stuff. And
but we let's talk about Evan Peters and his performance in this show, because he definitely carries a lot on his back with the performance. There's a lot of really hard to watch scenes, and it's just because of the way that he is and the way that he plays it. We've kind of made it a little running joke around the house ever since we started watching the show. I'm always going around asking if you want a drink.
He does a really good impression of Evan Peters.
I was just, I don't know what the smell is. A little meat. I left my fridge, the fridge open and the freezer went out and blah, blah, blah. It's just all that kind of stuff.
Right. He definitely gets in on that Milwaukee accent. And
I didn't even know how strong the accent was for Jeffrey Dahmer until I started watching the show.
Yeah. And so, and I told Ken that it kind of like makes me feel inappropriate to be like making.
Well, didn't somebody make fun of it and say that it was like Napoleon Dynamite?
Well,
the way that he was
brought
acting?
that up. Yeah, you said that he seemed like Napoleon Dynamite because he has the like.
It's just the stance, the way he's standing,
the glasses, and just his whole aesthetic or whatever. But I mean, obviously it's from the time period that he was in. But so that, like, there's no doubt that he was great in this show. He was. But like, some of the parts were a little comical, just because I kept thinking, and I mean this in like no offense to victims or the victims' families or whatever, but they made it seem like Jeffrey Dahmer was such a, I guess not lady killer, but a man killer. Like, they made him seem like he was just so attractive and so
irresistible.
Like, he was so irresistible or something, and like men just flocked to him.
The dude could get literally anybody to come back to his apartment. Like, anybody. And
that part was really hard for me to believe. And there were just so many, assuming that the situations played out like they happened. Obviously we're not going to have every situation be portrayed exactly the same. But you just can't help but think like, oh my gosh, like, I feel like it was just so obvious that he was not a good person. And like, why did they come back with him? Or why did they take a drink of his stuff? And like, there were just so many times where I'm like, oh my gosh, but
he has to excuse the smell in his apartment like so many times.
Right.
And he does it in like different ways. Well, I was cooking barbecue and, I guess I cooked it the wrong way. And I'm like, that's not going to smell like a rotting body.
Right. A rotting flesh. And then he has like an aquarium. And so he blames it on some like dead fish. Yeah. He definitely, has some stories to tell. But also, that's another thing, is he seemed like he was a very sloppy serial killer. But, and like, that's what was so horrible to watch, because, apparently in real life as well, like how it played out in real life, there were so many times where, he could have been caught, but they, the police, they didn't take the neighbor seriously, which you mentioned her earlier, Niecy Nash. She played Glenda, was his neighbor or whatever in the show. And so there were just so many times where she kept telling them that something was happening, something was going on. She would hear screams and sounds and smells, and they just wouldn't take her seriously. And so they definitely were like talking about how, in the time that this was going on, there was still a lot of, black versus white. I feel like
a lot of racial tension. They
racial.
They inject that in the show quite a bit.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, she's Glenda Cleveland is the only smart character in this entire show, and it does get a little annoying. Again, I know this is real life, and this is probably how it played out. I'm not saying it didn't, but everybody is so stupid in this show.
Yeah.
In particular, like the first half, when he's just having all these different encounters and just inviting people back, and they're just willingness to come in, even though it smells and it reeks to high heaven.
Right.
And it just looks sketchy. Like, people are looking around kind of like, what's going on here? He's like, can I make you a drink? And they're like, oh yeah, sure, get us a drink. And then he gives them a drink, and he pours the can into a glass, and it's like,
yeah, and like,
it's obviously sketchy, but they still drink. They still get drugged. And it's like, you guys could not be any more stupid. And it just gets annoying after a while.
Yeah. And I mean, you could argue that these people were like somewhat intoxicated. But I feel like in most of the scenes, like, the people weren't really that like out of it or anything.
Yeah.
Like,
and some of them were very young. They were kids. So I understand that. But like, grown men going into his house, and, I
mean, obviously it's, it's very unfortunate.
Come on, man. I just wanted to make you a drink,
Yeah. I guess maybe the whole point was that, Jeffrey Dahmer, he looked so harmless, I guess.
Yeah.
Or he seemed so, like
non-threatening.
Just non-threatening. Like, he just seemed a little, not all, like, I don't know the word. He just seemed very non-threatening, like you said. And so I guess that's how he was able to do it. But yeah, so for me, I feel like, I think you might have a differing opinion, but I enjoyed the first half more than the second half of the series. There were some parts in the second half that I did enjoy.
Yeah.
But I felt like it was more interesting in the first half just because you were getting more of the like incidences and stuff and just more of the
encounters, more of the blood and guts of it all, I guess.
yeah.
Even though I feel this was kind of a gruesome show, but it wasn't. I feel like they could have gone a little bit further, maybe with some of the
yeah,
gore.
I felt like and it could have been intentional that they didn't go full on. Maybe they were just trying not to be too disrespectful, because from what I've heard that the victims' families, like some of them are still alive, and all of that.
Yeah.
And so,
like, I mean, this is a guy that murdered people and cut them up and ate them in some cases.
Yeah, I mean,
and
it was
they didn't really dive as deep as they could have into all of that.
Right.
So they did show some restraint there, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I was honestly a little surprised that they didn't go as.
Now, don't get me wrong. There's some extremely like uncomfortable and kind of horrific scenes for sure, but it's just not on the level that it could have been, I think.
Right, especially like if you think of American Horror Story and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I felt like I could appreciate the later episodes that they were trying to focus on the victims, like the families and stuff in the last few episodes. I feel like, that is kind of important because you hear it a lot in our society about how we kind of glamorize these murders. It's always the killers that are on the front page. It's never the victims. Yeah. And so, that is very messed up when you think about it. And so
they do a good job with that, though, showing that and showing like how wrong it is, from, and they use Niecy Nash's character
as like a
voice of Glenda as that point of view. And they do dive deep into that. So I think they do a good job handling that. Like when he's in prison, he's getting a bunch of fan mail and stuff like that. His dad's writing a book. They're on whatever they were on, 2020 hard copy, whatever news program they were on.
Yeah.
Where they were like, she's kind of like, why are they getting all this like publicity? Like, he's a murderer. He shouldn't have any interviews or any of that stuff. He should just be in like solitary confinement. But in the world we live in, it's like people want to know about this stuff. So it's like you gotta trot out the murderers and have the interviews. Like, that's
right.
Press and that sells. So ratings.
Yeah. So, they definitely did that in the last few episodes, kind of, wrapping everything up, I feel like. And then I thought that it was just, I know you said that you remembered this kind of happening in your childhood and stuff. I have no memory of it. And so for me, it was just very like.
When was the first time you heard about Jeffrey Dahmer?
I don't know, honestly.
It wasn't with this show, was it?
No.
Okay.
But I don't know. I don't really have any memory of that. So for me, I felt like that there was a lot that I didn't know about him. And so, it was just, I mean, I hate to say it, but it was like interesting to just learn about who this man was.
It wasn't. I only really knew him as like a cannibal. Like, I just knew that he ate people. And that was really like, yeah, he did that. But that was, I feel like, a very small part of who he was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it was just, it was crazy to me too. Like at the end, they go up all the way until the end, where he's in prison and, that's where he gets killed, which, again, if you know the unfoldings in real life, that he got killed in prison.
I didn't even know he got killed like that. So.
Yeah. And so, and that was something that I looked up to verify, like, is that really how it happened? And it is. And so anyway, I thought it was very interesting how, he had been brought up in a religious home, a fairly religious home. And then he had ended up, resenting church, and he started like worshiping Satan, he said.
Yeah.
And then once he was in prison or whatever.
They worship Satan, Grandma.
Yeah. They kind of show this like switch in him to where it was almost like he was trying to change his life or something.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel like maybe that was the case, but I feel like the way Evan Peters played it, it was almost like it was an act and that it wasn't genuine.
You think?
But I don't know. Maybe it was.
Yeah, I don't know either. But I just thought that was interesting. Which I know that from what I've heard, it's pretty common when you're, in prison, especially for like life or on death, row, you're gonna maybe, turn your life over to God or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's like this whole baptism scene, and you just kind of see him like he's, like I said, trying to turn over a new leaf or something. He's like
almost like a redemption arc.
He was like trying to get along with the other prison inmates and stuff. And then, again, like I said, in the ending or whatever, I couldn't help but feel somewhat sorry for him, like when he got murdered. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like, but again, I think it's just because, you get a good actor.
It's the actor. It's the performance.
Yeah, obvious, I don't know.
And that's not the real Jeffrey Dahmer.
Right.
So a part of you knows that.
Yeah.
So even though he did horrible things in the show, you know that's Evan Peters. So, and you can't help but feel a little sorry for him.
The man that kills him, like he basically says that he's doing it because God told him to, which that kind of reminded me of the frailty.
Frailty, yeah. Which we watched recently.
And so, but there's that scene where Jeffrey Dahmer or Evan Peters is, the guy's telling him, like, I'm going to kill you. And he just kind of looks at him and he's like, okay. Like, he just accepts it. Yeah. And it was just, I don't know, it was a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, look, we've been talking about this show for a while. Do you want to put
I didn't realize how long.
Do you want to put a score on it? Do you want to wrap it up? I feel like we could talk about, I mean, it's so hard, I feel like, with TV series to like do full on reviews of them.
Yeah.
But I felt like we did this justice. I'd say, just wrapping it up, giving my overall thoughts, I did enjoy the show. It was, I don't want to say I enjoyed the first half better than the second half or the second better than the first half. There was things about both halves that I didn't enjoy all that much. I'd say as a show, I thought it was really well done. And I thought it told his story very well. I think they could have maybe trimmed a little bit off and maybe told it in 2 less episodes. There was definitely some fluff in those last 2 episodes that I feel like they could have condensed. But I'd say it was a very good show. I would give it a 4 out of 5. Yeah. For my actual score.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well.
All right, so that is our review of Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. Did you know we're getting 2 more seasons of this? They called, 2 more seasons of it. So I wonder what monster they'll tackle next.
Yeah. You kind of speculated that it would be the one guy.
John Wayne Gacy is in this show. He has a pretty significant part, I feel like, in one episode. So maybe they'll dive deeper into his story. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like that would make the most sense, because why else would they do it,
Jack Kevorkian, maybe. Could be pretty interesting.
I don't know who that is.
Well, you'll find out if they do a show on him. But thank you all so much for watching this longer review. We appreciate you guys sticking with us. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. Comment down below if you watched Dahmer. What were your thoughts? Turn on those bell notifications and follow us on our social media accounts down below. We'll see you guys later.
Bye, guys.